Hi, this is Black Sheep Family History, stories of our not-so-illustrious ancestors and how to find them. I'm your host, Janet Hall Werner. I'm a lawyer and I worked as an advocate on Capitol Hill for 25 years until 2016 when I chucked that to pursue my true calling as a professional genealogist. I specialize in finding the stories hidden in the records, as well as DNA, immigration and migration, and research pretty much anywhere east of the Mississippi and some places west. In this series, I'll be talking to other genealogists, as well as telling some of my own Black Sheep stories that I've uncovered over the years. Black Sheep Family History is available as a podcast if you're on the go, and it's also on YouTube, where I show you the records and the pictures that go along with the story. Search for and subscribe to Black Sheep Family History wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe to my Black Sheep Family History channel on YouTube. New episodes drop on Hump Day with a new story to get you through the rest of the week. And educational extras hosted by Jane drop on Fridays. And if you have a Black Sheep story about one of your ancestors that you'd like to tell, or you'd like me to tell, or if you need research help, please drop me a note at janet@blacksheepfamhist.com. Okay, today we're talking with Kathy Astrom. And Kathy, why don't you tell us about your background?
I'm a librarian, and I'm actually a relatively recent person with working on the genealogy. I just got started at the end of 2019, just in time to keep myself busy the following year. Yeah. And when I started, I did what most people do nowadays, which is sign up with an Ancestry account. And I just got started working on my family going backwards. And, in that first rush of adding names to the family tree, the first name that really caught my attention was my paternal grandmother's paternal grandmother, my great-great-grandmother. And I first noticed her because her name on her profile was Nancy Caroline Humphrey Dunston Martin McMaster.
That's a lot of names.
A lot of names, exactly. And I thought, oh, how sad to lose two husbands, And then I was adding her husband's information on her profile. And then I noticed, wait a minute, they didn't die. She had two divorces in the late 1890s and early 1900s. And that made my eyebrows pop a little bit.
Yeah.
But I continued on adding names to the family tree. And after a couple of months of that first rush of getting names on there, I started to breathe, go back to the beginning, make sure you did everything right. Mm-hmm. And so one of the first things I did was stop by Carrie's page again, or Nancy Caroline's page again. And I noticed that her hints thing had two extra new additions, her death notices from the local newspaper. And in it, the death notices mentioned that she had been the pastor of the First National Spiritualist Church in Oklahoma City. Talk about eyebrow raising. I mean, my eyes nearly popped out of my head. I went, spiritualist? Pastor? Really? So, and I'm thinking like a traditional church. It's a building with pastors that cycle in and out. So I'm starting to research the First National Spiritualist Church, finding nothing online at all. So then I thought, well, as a librarian, my usual first source, if I can't find anything on my own, go to the local library. So I pulled up the Oklahoma City Public Library's webpage, and sure enough, they have a family history or local history genealogy page. And in it, they have a little field where you can ask a question. So 10 o'clock on Sunday night, I gave her name, I gave the name of her church, and I said, if you have anything about her church, great. If you have anything about her tenure there, even better. Any help you can give would be great. The next day, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I get an email from Lisa Bradley at the Oklahoma City Public Library, who I have to give all the major props to because she is amazing. She had this huge folder for me filled with newspaper articles, classified ads, Sanborn maps, local land deeds, and a court case from Justia.com. And I thought, oh, so that's when I fell down the rabbit hole that is Nancy Caroline Humphrey Dunston Martin McMaster's life. And I have been researching her for the next 4 years. And I'm actually determined to write a book about her.
It would be a great book. There's a lot here. Okay, so that's terrific. So let's start with her early life.
Okay. She was born on November 16th, 1860 in Groveland, Michigan. She was the oldest of 6 children who survived to adulthood. Her father was Stephen Humphrey, who was from Ontario, and he was a sawyer in the local Michigan logging camps. That was very, very big business in the late 1800s. So he ran the sawmills in the area. And her mother was Sarah Ann Johnson. She was originally from Pennsylvania. Now, when Carrie was still 2 months shy of her 18th birthday, she married a local farmer and laborer named Benjamin Dunston. And over the next 6 years, they had 4 children: George, Rose, Minnie, and Jesse. And Jesse was my great-grandfather.
Okay.
Now, Rose actually, when she was about 2 or 3 years old, had polio and was left with a crippled leg, very limited mobility. She ended up having surgery on it a little bit later on in life, gave her a little bit more ability to get around. But when in November of 1889, so when it was 11 years after they'd been married, the children were between ages 5 and 10, and Carrie decided to walk out of the marriage. She took her 2 girls with her, Rose and Minnie, but she left the 2 boys behind with her father. And I think she was picking her battles, because we'll find out how much she wanted all 4 of her children. And over the course of the next 3 years, the divorce was still ongoing, had not been concluded yet in the courts. She was working she had her own dressmaking shop, and she had her girls living with her in St. Louis, Michigan, not too far away from where the boys were living in Mount Pleasant. And she, in October of 1889, Benjamin filed for custody of the girls. He was arguing that she had been having an affair with her father's business partner, Frank Rich, and as a result, she was an unfit mother. And he wanted the girls. And luckily enough, through Ancestry, I found a series of family letters, including a letter that Carrie had written to her father in October of that year. And she was expressing her anxiety over the upcoming case, and the fact that she viewed Benjamin as a very controlling person, which is why she left him. In fact, this was just another example of him trying to control her life by taking her girls away. And in fact, he not only wanted the girls, he wanted an investment that she had made on their behalf. She's like, what do you want from me? And she was very, very frustrated, you can tell in this letter. But she also mentioned that Frank Rich, the man who was accused of being her lover, had pledged that he would give her all of the savings to make sure that she kept her girls. So I think he was her lover. You don't get that kind of thing from your father's business partner.
Right.
So November 15th of 1892, there was a morning hearing at the courthouse in Mount Pleasant, Michigan, and the judge ruled in Benjamin's favor. Carrie lost her girls.
Wow.
Over noon, they were waiting for Benjamin to file for a cash bond. Girls were in the custody of the judges in the judges' chambers, and Carrie implemented Plan B, something she apparently had already figured out. She got a livery man from the local stables to smuggle the girls away from the judges' chambers, get them to the train station a couple towns away, and had them where she met them with tickets bound for Canada. She was taking the girls and she was running.
Wow.
Judge realized really quickly what happened. The sheriff put out a call to the local police station saying, keep an eye out for a woman this description, 2 little girls. She's from St. Louis, Michigan. We don't know for sure where she's going, but probably Canada. And sure enough, by sundown, the sheriff had them back at the courthouse, all 3 of them. She was arrested for kidnapping. And when the judge called for the girls, and I'm quoting from the newspaper here, she fought like a tiger to keep her children by her side, so that she ended up being thrown in jail to restrain her. And they were like, we're going to need a mental evaluation on you because you're so unhinged. She was in prison for jail for a couple days at least. We know that from a later newspaper article. And but Benjamin took the girls home with him within the week. However, the next month, he filed for a civil case against Frank Rich for $10,000 in 1892 for interfering in his marriage.
Right.
And 3 months after that, 4 months, March of 1893, the newspaper said that the case was settled, both sides giving up something. It was unspecified what both sides gave up. However, 4 months later, the gossip column mentioned that Minnie was now living with her mother. So I think Frank gave up some money, like he said he would, and Carrie got her girls. That was in late spring, 1893. A year later,
and there were two boys in this
right
scenario, and he still had them, right?
He still had the boys. Okay. April of 1894, so a year after the settlement, there was a real estate transaction column in the paper in which Carrie transferred property to Ben for $1. She wouldn't do that for nothing. Right. And sure enough, at the end of the year, gossip column, George was visiting his friends in his father's hometown, and he was no longer living with his dad. Okay, so she got her boys back.
So she got the boys back with the land transaction.
So kidnapping didn't work. Bribery, however, is very effective. So money and land. Yeah. And Ben was willing to give up his kids. And Carrie got her children, all four of them. It took her 4.5 years, but she got them. And she continued living in central Michigan. And then a few years later, she married again to Thomas Martin, who we really know very little about, actually.
Wait, now, did she marry Frank?
No, she did not. He was actually married.
Okay, and she was still married.
She was still married, at the time.
Okay, so, at the time, yeah. Okay, yeah. And he was married, okay.
Yeah. So
that was probably a pretty scandalous
exactly.
relationship at that time.
Exactly.
Okay. But then they fall out, and then she gets married to, Thomas
Martin.
Okay.
And according to census take-here notes in 1900, they had been married since 1897. I had yet to find any paperwork with their marriage record. However, Michigan marriage records in the 1890s were still pretty spotty, so I can understand that. By 1899, they had moved to Chicago. And they moved into a house on Halsted Street, directly across from the entrance to the Union Stockyards. And he was a bartender. She opened up her own barbershop in their house. And in fact, I have her business card, and it is amazing. It's one of my very favorite things that I have from the family memorabilia that I have. It has her photo on it. It says Lady Barber. This is Mrs. Carrie Martin, Lady Barber, and she is also advertising fine cigars and tobaccos and first-class laundry service. So I like to imagine one of her clients coming down from his 4th-story walk-up, heading to work at the stockyards, stops by her house for a quick shave and trim on his way into work, drops off his dirty clothes, goes to work a long shift at the stockyards, gutting pigs or whatever, and then comes back, picks up his clean clothes, picks up a couple of cigars to enjoy for the evening. So I like to imagine that's how her clients had their lives.
Probably.
So she did that for about 10 years. In 1908, that was the last year that she and Thomas had the same home address in the city directory. After that, he moved out, and she continued living where she was at. So they must have divorced. However, I've yet to find any divorce records. Mm-hmm. So I still have a question as to whether or not they officially married or they just told everybody they married.
Right.
I don't know.
But she did get divorced from the first husband.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that wasn't officially divorced. Like I said, she could very well have married and divorced Thomas. I just can't find a record on either end.
Now, at that period, I don't know about Michigan, but some states had legislative divorces in that time frame.
Well, Cook County in Chicago, that's where I would have assumed that she'd gotten a divorce. Their records are actually very complete. I actually had someone look up her records at the Cook County Clerk's office, and I gave them all the dates. The Chicago Tribune had all the divorce proceedings along with all the other court cases mentioned in the paper on a daily basis.
Okay.
So I pulled all the Martin v. Martin divorce cases I could find over a 5-year period, and none of them were Thomas and Nancy. So just to let everybody know also, she went by the name Nancy until the end of her first marriage, and then she started using the name Carrie. So since that was her chosen name for the rest of her life, that's what I call her.
Yep.
So she and Thomas Martin then split up. However, it seems to have been amicable because he ended up dying in 1913, and he left her property, even though they were no longer together.
And they didn't have children.
They did not have any children, no.
Okay.
She was already almost 40 years old when they married. So, and in fact, her youngest was already like 13 years old at that point.
Okay.
And so she had the 3 youngest children living with her in the 1900 census in Chicago. The oldest, George, had already moved out to New York City. He was in the Army briefly for the Spanish-American War. And then he moved to New York, seems right after service. So by 1908, 1909, her marriage had broken up. Her children were all moving out on their own, except for Rose, one who had polio. She was still single. And it seems like Carrie just wanted to change her life. So she up sticks, moved to central Montana, and got 160 acres and became a farmer. And middle of gold mining country. And she was out there. She had a farmhand named Lloyd Dell McMaster in the 1910 census. And she was doing that for the next year and a half, until September of 1911, when the railway that ran along her eastern edge of her property opened a brand new railway town, called Hilger, Montana, in the middle of Fergus County. And she immediately saw the opportunities with the building boom and everything. She opened the first restaurant in town, which she operated out of a tent until a building was constructed for her. And in fact, hers was the second business to open after the saloon. So
you gotta drink.
Exactly. The priorities are there. So she ran the restaurant until October of 1913. And she married her farmhand Lloyd Dell McMaster. They married in November of 1911. He ran the hotel that was directly above the restaurant. It was a 2-story building on that end. And he ran the hotel while she ran the restaurant below. And like I said, she did that for a couple of years. And then she stopped running the restaurant and she sold it to a man named Joe Mannis, a Greek immigrant who actually, real quick aside, talk about black sheep. The restaurant ended up burning down in June of 1931. And 6 months later, he killed one of his neighbors. And he ended up dying in prison in the 1940s. So that was an interesting thing. And then, so Carrie was 1913. She had stopped running the restaurant. Lloyd was still managing the hotel above the restaurant. And that was their life for the next 4 years. Now, one thing that she was doing when she had the restaurant was she was hosting spiritualist meetings on Sunday nights. The newspaper was rather skeptical, let's say, in their reporting of these weekly meetings. But we'll find out in an article that was published in the 1920s that Carrie had been a spiritualist trance medium since the early 1900s. So when she was in Chicago, she became a spiritualist. And she immediately clombed onto the idea of trance medium. So she would go into trances, commune with spirits on the other side. If you believe in that sort of thing, I don't, but I believe that she did. So I'm not going to argue with her belief system, But she had these weekly meetings at the restaurant. In 1915, she and Lloyd, who apparently was also an adherent, they went to the State Spiritualist Convention in Butte, Montana. And in fact, they were named to the National Convention in New York City, but I don't think they went. They ended up going on vacation that year instead. But they were apparently still very devout spiritualists. And that was their life until March of 1917, when new management happened at the hotel. A month later, they moved to Oklahoma. Her uncle was living there. I think that's who she decided to join. So after a few years in Edmond, Oklahoma, they moved to Oklahoma City in 1919, and she became not only a dressmaker, which she was returned to, and he was working as a barber, but she also went back to trance medium, and she was doing that for money, because in October of 1919, she had, pull up the info here. Yep. She was having a reading done in October of 1919 for a woman named Bessie Jones. And I've got the article here about...
We'll have it on the video.
Yeah. I'll just read a little bit from it. Bessie was, quote, a pretty little blonde. And she said Mrs. McMaster told her that she was to meet some blonde boys and that a dark man would come between them and herself. She told me I wasn't working and I would have a job in a short time. And this woman did a reading for me. And the police came and arrested her for illegal fortune telling. So February of 1920, she had her trial. The girl
said none of the stuff she predicted came true.
No, none of that happened. And in fact, nothing came true. I don't know any blonde boys, and I didn't go away, she said on cross-examination. And then the article does a great job of going into explaining what a trance medium is. Like I said, basically, you go into trance, you commune with a spirit from the other side who provides advice for the person looking for information.
Okay.
So basically, that's what it is. And in fact, Carrie said that she had been a trance medium for 18 years. So that was in 1920. So by 1902, she had become a spiritualist. And she positively knows that she can talk with the spirits. She says she can give a demonstration in the courthouse under the right conditions. And it is possible she may be called upon to commune with the spirits for the benefit of the jurors. I don't know if she ever did, but this article was from early on in the trial. And so the the jurors came back, said, illegal fortune telling. And they gave her a $50 fine and 30 days in jail. She immediately appealed. She had the financial support of the spiritualist community, who apparently had a fund set aside for mediums who were being arrested under this law. And so they helped pay for her defense and for her appeal. And 2 years later, in 1922, the Criminal Circuit Court of Appeals heard her appeal. And in July of 1920...
I'm sorry, this is in Oklahoma City, right?
Oklahoma City, yeah.
Okay. So the appeals court was a criminal appeals court in
Oklahoma, yeah.
Okay.
And in July 1922, they handed down their opinion. And in it, she had argued her appeal was based on the idea that she was a spiritualist, and she was not only a spiritualist, she was a certified minister in the spiritualist faith. And she was arguing that her arrest was an infringement of her First Amendment right to freedom of religion.
Wow.
And her appeal, the opinion that came down from the justices, basically boiled down to, we know what you're trying to do. You want us to rule spiritualism as a religion. We're not touching that with a 20-foot pole. However, we will talk about your case in specific, and given the details of your case, because you said you were communing with a spirit named Minnehaha, who is at best mythical, at worst completely fictional, made up by Longfellow for the poem Hiawatha. So therefore, illegal fortune telling. And so the justices did waive their 30 days in jail. She did have to pay the $50 fine, and they told her that she was supposed to stop practicing. She did the first, paid the $50 fine. She did not do the second. She continued to advertise her services for the rest of her life. And she also continued to practice as a pastor for the First National Spiritualist Church. Her husband, Lloyd, was by this point working as a quote unquote divine healer. He was a spiritualist healer. And in fact, when he passed away, his obituary said Dr. Lloyd McMaster, which was a stretch at best. But he was viewed as a doctor. And they advertised their services in tandem together. And her life in Oklahoma City apparently was not affected by the notoriety of this case, because not only was it, and it was very notorious, because it was not only reported in Oklahoma City and in Oklahoma as a whole. Spiritualism was a very big thing post World War I and post Spanish flu. A lot of people, and they all wanted to grieve in a way that communed with their dead relatives. So a lot of people became spiritualists. And as a result, the argument that spiritualism was a religion was very high topic for people in that faith-based community. And her appeal, even though it was unsuccessful, was reported by newspapers around the country. I found examples from Long Beach, California, to New York City and Boston.
Wow.
Yeah, and dozens of articles across the country. Hers is just one case of many in the 1920s that were all gunning for the same goal, to get spiritualism called a religion in the courts. But I think hers was one of the earlier examples. So as a result, it was high interest.
Yeah, it's interesting. You talk about the Spanish flu. When you have a national trauma like that, so all these people died, and it's interesting that spiritualism became kind of a thing to deal with that national trauma.
And in fact, the first wave of spiritualism was post-Civil War in the 1860s.
Same thing.
Same thing happened then, and it just, you have to find comfort somewhere.
Yeah, I think I'll try to do a little video on spiritualism.
It's a fascinating topic. I've been reading up a lot on it since discovering Carrie, and it's been very interesting.
Very interesting.
But even though she had all this notoriety, she actually apparently did not affect her reputation in town, because by 1925, 3 years after the appeal, she was involved in local politics. She was the vice chair of her city ward. She was hosting Democratic Party meetings at her house. And I was very excited to find that. That was my most recent discovery of her. And I was just sort of flabbergasted that you would think there'd be a little bit of a, who is this woman? She's rather sketchy. The court said that she was illegitimate, and she's running for office and winning,
Wow, that's great.
It's not only that, but in 1928, in January of 1928, another member of the local spiritualist community, he edited a book, a collection of transcripts of readings done by Carrie and another medium in Oklahoma City. The book is called Voices from Beyond the Veil, and I was very lucky to have a copy of it. My third cousin, who was descended from Carrie's youngest daughter, Minnie, that's her great granddaughter, Linda. She and I connected on Ancestry. We discovered each other there. We've become genealogy buddies. And one of our biggest connections is our fascination with Carrie. And Linda just happened to be Googling Carrie's name and found this book posted online. And she snagged it immediately. And she grabbed it. And then a couple of years later, she mailed it to me, said, "Here, you're now the repository of all things Carrie." So I have a copy of it, and it is an amazing book to have, because it represents something that was so important for the last 25 years of her life, that it's just an amazing thing to hold, knowing that this was such a pivotal thing going on in her life for so many years, more than a third of her life, you know.
Right.
And so that was her life. She and Lloyd were in Oklahoma City. And then let me pull up my notes, exact date. She ended up dying on November 10th, 1928, just a week shy of her 68th birthday. She is buried in Oklahoma City alongside Lloyd and Rose. Unfortunately, she's the only one at the gravesite that actually has a stone in the ground. I'm hoping eventually, maybe if I have enough money, to be able to acknowledge Lloyd and Rose at their gravesite. Maybe, who knows? One thing interesting about Rose was that she had followed Carrie from Chicago to Montana to Oklahoma City, and there she became an advocate for polio victims like herself, especially in the wake of FDR's election in 1932. And in the 1930s and 1940s, there are a couple of articles about her work for polio victims and what they.
And she never got married.
She actually got married a couple times.
Oh, okay.
In fact, when she was in Montana, she had a daughter out of wedlock, and her name was Esmeralda. And then she did get married in 1913 to a man named Frank Perkins, and they had a boy named Watson Perkins, who was actually became known as Perk. In fact, his gravestone says Perk Perkins on it. Both of them came with their mother to Oklahoma City. And in fact, I will put out an appeal out there. Anybody who's in Oklahoma City that knows somebody descended from Esmeralda Perkins Sale, that was her married name, S-A-L-E. She actually had two children who she named after Carrie and Lloyd. So she had Nancy Caroline Sale and Lloyd Dow Sale. And then Watson Perkins had several children of his own. I connected briefly with two of his granddaughters, but they only gave me some medical condition history. They really seemed to know nothing about their family beyond that, at least nothing that they shared with me. And I have not been able to talk with them since. So I am putting out an appeal. If anybody is out there who's descended from Rose or knows somebody descended from Rose, please have them call me. I figure if anybody would know anything about Carrie or Rose, they might. Because that's the one thing about Carrie's life, is that the only thing, I've connected with descendants from all four of her children. Mine, of course, my family, but then Minnie's great-granddaughter is my genealogy buddy, who I discovered on Ancestry. Linda is the one who found that book. And I connected with Lee, who is Carrie's oldest boy. He had a grandson named Lee, who I connected with, and we talked for an hour on the phone. He knew nothing about his father's family at all. Mm-hmm. And these two women from Oklahoma City, who I connected with briefly, they apparently seemed to know very little about their grandfather's family either.
So what's your theory about why this story hasn't been handed down?
I personally think that her children were embarrassed by her. I think she was such a radical woman doing such radically different things that were not socially acceptable at the time.
The divorces,
the spiritualism, working on her own. She had so many different jobs. She was an entrepreneur. She was out there surviving. And to be quite blunt, that was something that seemed to be, she didn't really care if anybody thought bad about her. She was out there doing things on her own and surviving and living her life. And I think her children were, not too happy about it. The only thing that got passed down was my great-grandfather, Jesse, also became a barber in Chicago. He had a shop until 1950 or so. And I actually have her business card that was passed down by Jesse. And I personally think that his daughters probably asked him once, "Hey, Dad, why did you become a barber?" "Oh, it's something my mom did." And that's the only thing that got passed down to anybody in my generation or the generation above, was that she had been a barber in Chicago around the year 1900. That's all that was information. All that's rest of her life is what I found and what Linda has also found on her own as well.
Well, I would say you've found a lot, and if maybe it skipped a few generations, but you've resurrected her. And given that Carrie was a spiritualist, I'm sure she would appreciate that.
I definitely want to do a couple shout outs real quick.
Sure.
In addition to the Oklahoma City Public Library and Lisa Bradley, again, thank you so much. I would also highly recommend, if anybody's looking for information on Michigan, if they have relatives that they need information on, the Central Michigan University has the historical newspapers database of newspapers from around the state. These are newspapers I have not found on newspapers.com. I have not found them on Chronicling America. These are newspapers I have only found through this database. And
Okay.
this is where I found all the information about this custody case, about Carrie's life, about Ben's father, my third great grandfather, who died in 1848 when he was riding home drunk in his wagon, that literally fell off the wagon, hit his head on the way down, landed in a puddle, and drowned.
Oh, my goodness.
And I found all this at that Central Michigan.
I'll put a link in the show notes.
Definitely. It's a great search engine too. Really, really well constructed.
Great.
Easy to navigate. And then the only other thing is, don't be afraid to expand your search if you're looking for information. I found Joe Manis, the Greek immigrant who took over Carrie's restaurant. I found him just by expanding my search through newspapers.com. And not only did that give me information about him, but it gave me when he took over the restaurant, when Lloyd stopped managing the hotel, because on the very same page of newspaper that mentioned that Joe was expanding the restaurant, that's where the announcement of the hotel management change was at. So I never would have known when they left Montana if I hadn't done that.
Newspapers are such an amazing resource, and newspapers.com is definitely the go-to spot.
Yeah, and also I found on the Central Michigan University website, I found an interesting little side note on her arrest for kidnapping. I just expanded my search for just the name Dunston, and I ended up finding an amusing little article, or at least that's how the newspaper writer perceived it to be, of a woman who got off the train in Saginaw, Michigan, and she was very similar, apparently, to the description of Carrie, because the policeman approached her saying, "Where did you come from?" She said, "St. Louis, Michigan," which is where Carrie was from. Mm-hmm. And they immediately asked her, "Do you have two little girls?" She said, "Well, I have one daughter, but who's very petite, but I would not call her little." And they were asking her all these questions, not telling her why they were asking her these questions, until finally they let her go. The next day, she was very upset. So she went to the mayor to complain. The mayor said, "I don't know what's going on." So she went to the police chief to complain, and he busted out laughing. And he explained that they were looking for this woman who had taken her two daughters. And apparently, you look a lot like this woman. And that's when they mentioned at the end of the article that Carrie was still, Mrs. Dunston, as they referred to her, was still in jail after 2 days. That's how I know that she had been in prison for at least 2 days.
It's amazing what things these small town papers would report on.
And like I said, they approach it as this very funny little story, but I'm reading this going, this is the story of my great-great-grandmother who's going through some emotional turmoil here. You know?
Right. Well, that's a great story. It's just a terrific story, and it raises a lot of interesting issues around that whole spiritualism movement. I think that's very interesting for the time.
And that's one of the things I definitely want to do more research on, is discovering exactly what divine healing entailed, because I wanted to find out I figured out exactly what she was doing. I could figure that out. But what was he doing? And what was beyond, what was the actual religious aspects of their faith, of their, what was she doing at these past, as a pastor. I want to get the details of what spiritualism entails. What does it involve? Because if I'm going to write a book about her, I need to know this. And one other thing that I definitely want to do is try to pin down. I have one family photo that I inherited of an elderly woman. Obviously, it looked to be cut down to fit into an envelope because it's only like 3 inches long and 1 inch wide. And it's an elderly woman, and on the back, in my grandmother's handwriting, it just says grandma. If this is Carrie, because my grandmother's other grandmother had died when she was only 31, so it couldn't have been her. But if this elderly woman was actually Carrie, the last photo I have of her was from the 1922 Oklahoma City newspaper article in which they took a photo of her for her reporting on her appeal. And if this is her in this photograph, she aged considerably in the last 6 years of her life. Because this woman looks significantly older than just 6 years between 1922. And I'm guessing this photo is probably from the last year of her life or so. And the problem is all the photos I have of her, none of them match the angle of this photograph exactly. So it's hard to match up the features exactly.
You might get an AI tool or explore using an AI tool that can work with photos from different angles.
I think I might just do that because I really, really want to find out if this is Carrie. Because if it is, that's the last photograph I have of her, And that's definitely some of the things I want to do in going forward in my research.
Sounds good. Okay, well, thank you so much for this story. It's been wonderful talking with you, and Carrie is quite the character. So
thank you so
we
much.
Appreciate it. All right. Thanks for watching Black Sheep Family History, stories of our not-so-illustrious ancestors and how to find them. Remember to subscribe to the Black Sheep Family History channel on YouTube, and remember all the other ways that you can support this podcast and video series to keep these episodes coming. And if you have a Black Sheep story you'd like to share, or you'd like me to share, or if you need research help, drop me a note at janet@blacksheepfamhist.com. See you next time. Black Sheep Family History is produced, edited, and narrated by me, Janet Hall Werner. YouTube videos are edited with DaVinci Resolve and Shotcut. The podcast is edited with Audacity. Educational extras are narrated by me with assistance from a voice clone from 11 Labs. Music is created using Suno AI. Genealogical research is conducted by Black Sheep Family History guests, and educational extras are researched by me with assistance from AI tools ChatGPT and Perplexity AI. Sign up for the Black Sheep Society to receive bonus Black Sheep content to help you discover the Black Sheep in your family tree. Consider supporting the series by making a contribution through buymeacoffee.com. Subscribe to our channel, Black Sheep Family History on YouTube, and search for Black Sheep Family History wherever you get your podcasts and follow the show.